Are you overwhelmed by all the different methods for cutting and sewing triangles? Some of these techniques claim to be the easiest, while others advertise as being the quickest or the most precise. How do you decide which one to use? In this video, you'll make this Shoo Fly block using a technique that I think is the easiest, quickest, and most precise for cutting and sewing triangles. It involves adding a little extra fabric when calculating seam allowances for those triangles that form squares when sewed together. These triangles are referred to as half-square triangles. Ready to begin? You can download these free patterns at learnhowtoquilt.com under the Quilt Classes tab. Scroll down to the Saturday Sampler class. Decide on a plan for your fabric placement. Shading in your pattern before you begin will help with fabric choices. Be aware that the block's design changes based on the value placement of your fabric. For more information about fabric value, check out our Saturday Sampler 9-patch video. As always, you want to press your fabric before cutting. Then cut 5 2.5-inch squares. You want to make sure that your squares are cut on the straight of grain and the cross grain where there's very little stretch. The more the fabric stretches, like here on the bias, the harder it is to sew accurately. Unfortunately, when you cut triangles, at least one of the 3 sides will end up on the bias. If you can get 2 of those sides on the straight of grain or cross grain, that will make your life easier. So to cut out these triangles, we're going to start out with a 3-inch square. And then we'll cut that square on the diagonal. So where does this 3-inch measurement come from? Before you cut out your triangle, you first need to determine the finished size. That's the size without seam allowances. Go to your quilt or pattern and measure one of the shorter sides. In this case, that's 2 inches. I'll take the finished size, 2 inches, add 1 inch, and that's how I get 3 inches. That's the size of the square that I need to cut. Most of the time, I'm sewing 2 of these triangles together to form a square. Instead of cutting each square individually and then cutting each diagonal, I like to take 2 scraps of fabric, put right sides together, and then cut 2 squares at once. Then I'll cut this set on the diagonal. I'm ready to go straight over to the sewing machine with this. Before sewing, you want to make sure that all of your edges line up. And since I'll be sewing on the bias here, and I don't like to pull or stretch that bias, I'm not going to use any pins. If you're not comfortable with that, then it's okay to put a few pins in. I also like to use what I call a leader or a feeder, which is a scrap of fabric folded in half. I'm using a regular stitch length for this 1/4-inch seam. Put my triangle tips right up next to that and sew. If you notice, my pieces are starting to come apart, so I need to sort of check that, and I'll hold on to them with my scissors to keep them straight, to keep them together. Pick up my next set, make sure everything's lined up, and chain piece. I'll continue sewing these sections together till I get to the end. I'll use a follower. Take this over to the ironing board and press. After pressing, you'll want to trim to a 2.5-inch square. This is your chance to get this diagonal running from this tip to this tip. This whole process is often referred to as squaring up. To get started, you'll need to find the 45-degree line on your ruler and place that over the diagonal First you'll trim off these edges, turn the block, and then trim these edges. So you need a little extra all the way around. So let me maneuver this, slide this on that diagonal. I can see that there's a little extra here, 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 and here, and I'm ready to trim. Make sure you hold the ruler tight as it has a tendency to slip. Pick up your block, turn direction, place the ruler, the 45-degree line over your diagonal. You want your fabric to be at 2.5 inches here and 2.5 inches here, and you're ready to trim. Use your pattern to double check to make sure your square is accurate. If I'm working on a large quilt with many half square triangles, I like to make a jig. I put tape at that 2.5 inch mark, and then I can easily find where everything needs to go. Lay out your block. You'll be sewing in rows. Put right sides together. To save time, I like to do that in each row. And then either pin, clip, or find some method of reminding yourself which side you're going to sew. My method is I always keep that side in my hand, and then I go to the sewing machine and I place that side next to my foot. When all your sets have been sewn together, lay out your block. Put right sides together, stack, and take it over to the sewing machine. After sewing each row, I pressed for ease of construction by following the arrows on my pattern. This is the bottom row, and you'll see I press this seam in and I press this seam in. I put right sides together, and then I need to match these intersections. I want to make sure that this is all lined up before I pin on this side. I'll make sure that everything's lined up and that these intersections butt up right against each other, and then I'll pin. Here's my completed square. Please note that these triangle points will be 1/4 inch away from the edge. You don't have to worry about any matching until you sew them to the next block. If you didn't think this was the easiest, quickest, and most accurate method for making these half square triangles, you might be interested in learning about other methods. You can find free videos at learnhowtoquilt.com under the Beginner Basics tab. Scroll down to Cutting and click on Half Square Triangles. Now's the time to get your other sampler blocks out and start thinking about how you want to place them in your final quilt. In the next video in this series, you'll find out about matching those triangle tips. Thanks for visiting learnhowtoquilt.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share our videos with your friends.